We also know from previously in this trimester that accidents are one of the leading causes of death in our country. And as you can see here, 50% of all fatal accidents where the people die in those accidents, 50% of the time, those people are under the influence of alcohol. We're talking about automobile accidents, but we're also talking about all other accidents. For example, I had a neighbor that it was in his mid-20s that he and his friend went four-wheeling, and they'd both been drinking. And they got too close on the edge of a mountain and rolled and were killed. And how sad that was to watch that and see the sadness of their families and seeing those young lives that could have really contributed to society. Again, some of those would happen, but a lot of them wouldn't if people had better judgment and logic that is affected. And again, going back to binge drinking, which is what most Utahns do, when we binge drink, we have those effects more severely and more quickly. Next one I want to talk about is domestic abuse. 60% of domestic abuse cases, the person committing that domestic abuse is under the influence of alcohol. Now, for those of you who don't know what domestic abuse means, we're talking about in a home. And no way am I saying that these people are horrible people. They do horrible things a lot of times under the influence of alcohol that they wouldn't do had they been sober and not under that influence of alcohol. Just a true story. I told you I like to share stories every once in a while just to help you kind of get a visual of how damaging alcohol is to our society. True story of a young married couple that had been married for about 5 years. Now, this wasn't in Utah, but it was in the United States. They'd been married for 5 years, and as far as everybody that knew this couple could say, they loved each other, got along great, didn't really have arguments other than your typical disagreements that most married couples have, but no problems whatsoever. It so happened that on their 5th anniversary, it was a Friday, and he was leaving to go to work, and she said, make sure and come straight home because I have some fun things planned for our anniversary. Because a lot of times on Fridays, he and his buddies after work would go to a sports bar and drink for a little bit. And he says, okay, I'll come right home. Well, when he got to work, a couple of his friends at work found out it was his anniversary and says, hey, let's go after work. And he said, I can't go. I promised my wife I'd get right home. And they says, oh, we'll just have one drink just to celebrate your anniversary, and then you can take off. And when he finally said okay, and so he sits down, has a drink, and again, then he has a second one. It starts affecting his ability to judge time, his logic, his judgment. And pretty soon that one drink turns into quite a few drinks and turns into a couple of hours. He then goes home, has no recollection that his wife had plans or that it was even his anniversary by then. And he walks in the door and he sees that the table is all set beautifully with candles and food's on the table, and one plate, the food had been moved around and cut and a little bit eaten, you could tell. And he can't figure out what's going on. So he hollers for his wife. Well, they're in a split level house and his wife's upstairs, and she comes down and she's in a beautiful dress, but it's kind of wrinkled and her hair's kind of a mess. And her makeup's a little messed up, and because she'd been up there crying because she had these plans and he had forgotten and not come home. Well, he had no idea why she looked like that. And in his non-logical, non-judgmental ability to think clearly state, he thinks she's having an affair. And so he runs up there, gets a gun, and shoots her. Devastates, obviously, him, the community, and he wouldn't have done that had he been sober. And that's just one example of domestic abuse, of things that happen when people that normally wouldn't do those things do horrible things under the influence of alcohol.